Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association's webinar, Tenant Engagement and Supportive Services. I'm Dominika Krzeminska, Director of Programs and Strategic Initiatives at CHRA, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Thank you all for joining us. Before we begin, I'm going to give a brief overview of the webinar technology. I will then introduce our agenda and speakers for this afternoon's presentation. Today's webinar is in real time. You should now be able to see a title screen of the first presentation of today and be able to hear me via your computer speakers, headset, or through your telephone if you have chosen to dial in. You are currently all muted, and we do this to minimize background noise. However, if you wish to ask questions, which we encourage you to do so, you may type your type your question into the dialog box on the webinar control panel at any time during the presentation. And what we'll do is we'll address as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar during the question and answer period. But you can actually type those questions as we go. So moving on to the agenda for today. CHRA is pleased to have with us Carol Charlebois, Executive Director of Metro Nonprofit Housing Association in Nova Scotia, and Heather Rattanavong, Wraparound Services Coordinator at Camponi Housing Corporation in Saskatoon. This webinar will present on the strategies and programming of these organizations around tenant engagement and supportive services. First, we will hear about Metro Nonprofit Housing Association's unique approach to small-scale, grassroots tenant engagement through their placement and continuing care services, and how they work to integrate tenants into building management and strategic planning and decision-making processes. This will be followed by a presentation on Camponi Housing Corporation's tenant engagement strategy and wraparound services program for their largely Indigenous tenant base. I now have the pleasure of introducing to you our presenters. Carol Charlebois has been the Executive Director of Metro Nonprofit Housing for over 25 years. She has guided the development of the organization to include 6 buildings and 80 tenants, and programs such as the coffee shop drop-in and housing placement, and support and trustee services in both Halifax and Dartmouth. Heather Rattanavong graduated with a Bachelor of Arts Honours degree in Psychology from the University of Saskatchewan in 2002, and later completed post-secondary training in the healthcare field of orthoptics. Heather has experience in several different human service sectors. Her work experience includes adult corrections, crisis intervention services, youth mental health programming, and healthcare. She was hired by Camponi Housing Corporation in February 2016 as the Wraparound Service Coordinator. She is responsible for the development and implementation of individual and family support services for tenants. The wraparound services were fully implemented in February of this year, and she is now providing and coordinating the program services that have been developed. Welcome, Carol and Heather. I'm going to turn the presentation and the mic over to Carol, and we'll get started today. Thank you. Carol, you're on.
Thank you. Yes, tenant and participant engagement. Our approach, I think, is pretty low-tech, pretty old-fashioned and simple. We started in 1988 and started with a number of our founding board members were members of a national group called the Urban Core Support Network, and we found the philosophy of that group really helpful when we first started out, and we've continued, I think, to follow those principles. Just before I get started, though, just to let you know what some of the things we do, we provide 74 units of supported housing to single individuals. We have 6 buildings. We have 81 tenants because some of the units are shared. We also have a drop-in or housing support center where we serve the broader community. And we have 2 services, Halifax Housing Help and Dartmouth Housing Help, that assist people in finding housing, in maintaining that housing, and it offers a trusteeship program as well. As I said, our approach has really been to be very participant-centered. And for us, participation and power are important to that arrangement, as opposed to custodial housing. We were the first housing in Halifax that was not that was meant for people who needed some support, but was not custodial. The quotation there is from a publication of the Urban Core Support Network, and it really defines some of what we're about. We believe that when people endure unstable living conditions, they lack rootedness, a pivotal place around which to conduct daily activities, and they lack privacy, security, and ownership, and a place to express a sense of personal identity and culture. They need a place to call home. And having a home means having control over the circumstances of that home. And over the years, we've done that in a number of different ways. In all our projects, prospective tenants and prospective users of the services have been part of the initial training. When we started in 1988 to prepare for our first building, which we purchased in 1990, there were several people who could have been prospective tenants joining in the decisions around that building. The early focus of the organization was on recovery, with the thought that even though people had addictions issues, they still deserved a safe place to stay. But it did have a recovery orientation. There were a number of people on the board and prospective tenants who were involved in that movement. Our other buildings that we purchased in Halifax later take more of a harm reduction approach. But these first had a recovery focus. So one of the first things, as tenants moved in, one of the first things they had to work with was how would we implement that recovery kind of focus in the building. And after many, many meetings and hashing through a lot of ideas, we came up with what's called a residence assistance plan. It's a lot like an employee assistance plan in which staff of Metro Nonprofit would work with tenants if they were facing issues in their recovery. The meetings became quite heated. There were a lot of people said, one strike and you're out. And others didn't like that. And there were talk of 3 strikes, you're out, or 12 strikes, you're out. But we came up with this residence assistance plan that was a little more nuanced. That first building was for men only. We returned to the recovery community and asked women in that community if they would rather have a co-ed building or a women-only building, and they chose to have a space for women only, and we started Amethyst Apartments. And those first tenants too, well, they named their building after several meetings, came up with that name, looking at the idea of healing, and the women have tended to define that recovery much more broadly than the men have. We turned our attention then to the Halifax area, and did a number of focus groups, talked with people who were staying in shelters at that time, and they came up with a number of things they'd like to see. They wanted more housing of the kind we provided, that provided some support but was not custodial. And they talked also about wanting a place of their own, an organization of their own that would focus on their needs. We were able to purchase our first Halifax building, the Kennard Street building, and the people there have created a community that's not particularly recovery-based, but based in a desire to have a good place to live and to be healthy. So people were involved in the creation of that community, really. Buddy Day Street building, our first kind of purpose-built building, our prospective tenants were able to work with the architect, and they intervened in a number of places to change his plans. He'd planned, the apartments are very small, and he'd planned some very small differently sized bathtubs, and they were adamant that they needed regular sized bathtubs. He also had a design that used bold colors in the units, and then he had another design that used more muted colors. And the people, again, were adamant that they wanted that bold color. Tenant participation at the building level. We have building level meetings. There's a picture coming up on the next slide, I think, of one of the Dartmouth meetings. And the meetings there are, they're fairly easy to conduct because the people there are used to AA meetings and NA meetings. The meetings in the Halifax building are a little bit more chaotic, a little can become quite rambunctious, but we do keep having tenant participation meetings. But the most important kind of tenant meeting, though, is a new tenant selection. And we get really good turnouts for those meetings. People are concerned about who's moving into their building. They've made very good choices over the years, too. They don't take the easy route. They know that our buildings are a resource that needs to be used carefully. So they don't take people who don't need the kind of community and support that we can provide. The meetings are usually social gatherings and where food is very important. And there are a number of other points that affect the ability to have these meetings and to have good meetings. You need a certain number of people. Focus groups of prospective tenants said they would like to see buildings of between 12 and 24 apartments. And we know that our 8-unit building on Kennard Street is just too small to have really good meetings. We still do the tenant selection meetings there, but out of 8 tenants and 4 or 5 of whom suffer from social anxiety and can't attend meetings, it doesn't work well there in that building. There also is no common space to meet in that building. So those kind of practical things are very important to having the good meetings. And there's a photo of our meeting at one of the Dartmouth buildings, the building that does have the recovery focus. This photo illustrates the importance of the design of the building in allowing the development of community. This building with that beautiful courtyard is really conducive to the creation of a community. There was one instance where an employer of one of the tenants there had taken the tenant to hospital. He had a procedure there and brought him back, but the kind of procedure where you need somebody to keep an eye on you when you come home. And the employer wasn't able to stay with him, but he was telling me that he was so impressed that when people realized what was going on, about 5 people stuck their heads out and volunteered to keep an eye on him, to prepare a dinner for him. So there's a real sense of community, but that physical design of the building really helps that to develop. I mentioned that aside from our supported housing, we have a housing support center. Some people call it the coffee shop, but a lot goes on there. The center began out of the focus groups that we operated when we first turned our attention to Halifax. And I think in this project, it probably became the purest form of a participant-driven project, because we started in a borrowed flat, and the staff person who was going to lead that center sat there with an electric kettle and a jar of instant coffee, wondering what was going to happen. The center developed from the expressed needs of the people who were using it. It's developed so that now we're serving 300 cups of coffee there a day, coffee and tea. There are a number of other sub-programs operating out of the center, and we have a new space, of course, in our new building. We have one rule, though: be nice or leave. It's the only rule there. We've never barred anybody for any more than the days that a negative kind of event happened. We've the rule is really kind of the place is kind of self-policing too. We wouldn't be able to operate that center, I don't think, if participants didn't buy into the rules and really think of it as their place. I remember walking in one day, or I passed a man on the on the sidewalk, wondering if he was going to go in, and he told me no, he was too drunk that day, and so he just he wasn't going to go in. So it's quite self-policing. There's the support center in 1996 in an old borrowed flat, and the center today in our new space. The coffee shop, you can see it's a pleasant place. I love going there. You can see all the photos of participants on the wall. People come in and ask to have their photos put up there. And this photo also illustrates the resources that people can access at the center. The woman there is a nurse from the Mobile Outreach Street Health team, and we have quite close contact with other services in the community and assist people to navigate them. On the policy level, our tenants and participants have had quite a bit of participation as well. As I mentioned already, participants and tenants participated at the beginning of all our projects and have helped to shape them. People have representation on the board. Each building can have up to 2 representatives on the board, and the Housing Support Center can also have a representative. They've been represented on our strategic planning process. We've been going through a new strategic plan over the past year, and we're currently in the process of changing our profile, updating our profile in the community, and renaming our group. We're going to be called Welcome Housing and Support Services, and that was a suggestion from a person who had been a tenant, is a current participant at the Housing Support Center, and is a board member. But the people, after many meetings, many tenant meetings and meetings with other stakeholders, we felt that was a name that would better indicate what we do: Welcome Housing and Support Services. When tenants come to us, they don't have to, but they have an opportunity to become part of our community. And part of that is in caring for each other. I mentioned the person coming back from an outpatient treatment and being offered all that support. I think we're very small, and we have a very small staff, and we can kind of punch above our weight because the tenants do a lot of the work. They support each other so well. It just makes such a huge difference. I remember being very happy when I heard one of our tenants talking to a friend and looking at our new building and saying, when we developed this property, that he was feeling such a part of it, that it was his development. This is a photo of Gordy, and Gordy has let us tell his story. He came directly to us from the street. He liked to have his pension for expenses other than rent, so we were very flattered and pleased when he decided that he would move into our building and he would pay rent. He'd been a person who came to our Housing Support Center for a long time, He was a very talented guitarist. They fell ill about a year ago and developed a terminal illness. And a lot of work on the part of our staff and on part of the mobile outreach street health team to get him into hospital. And he, as I said, had a terminal illness and was very ill in hospital. But last winter, one of our staff spent a lot of time with Gordy and was able to organize for him. We were so happy that this happened. Organized a chance to get out of hospital, to get a pass, and to go to the birthday party of another musician that he had played with over the years, Al Tuck from PEI. And it was just an amazing time for all the musicians that attended that birthday party and for Gordy. And Gordy died about a month later, and again, we acted, he had no family, we acted as family in making the arrangements for his funeral and his burial. So if people require it or if they want it, they really become part of a community. We've had other activities outside, such as taking part in the Pride Parade. But our tenants also become a part of the economy with us. We hire tenants for odd jobs. We hire tenants for regular janitorial positions. All our buildings have tenants looking after those kinds of tasks. We hire tenants to support one another. Some of the tenants over the years have required assistance with housekeeping. Gordy, who I just spoke about, was one of them. And they felt much more comfortable having a tenant that they knew help them with those kinds of tasks than having an outsider do it. And we've also hired tenants in support staff positions. I mentioned the beginnings of our housing support center and how a staff person sat waiting, wondering what was going to happen as he tried to develop the housing support center. He was a tenant from one of our Dartmouth buildings. Became a very beloved member of the community here, and it's going to be remembered. He died last year. He's going to be remembered as we rename one of our buildings after him. And there's one of our tenants who's very proud of his janitorial work around his building. But aside from participating in the Metro nonprofit housing community, people have branched out. We found that when we did a kind of a survey with our tenants, that quite a large, about 70% of the tenants felt much more connected to community than they had before. They've gone out to join many organizations in the community, local churches. There's a local walking group attached to the clinic here. Several of them have become inspirational speakers for United Way. And a couple of them have been really active in community sharing, some community groups, Community Action on Homelessness. And one tenant in particular is on a board of a number of groups on poverty reduction, basic income, and he's on the board of Canada Without Poverty. Many of our tenants have been involved in the Humanities 101 course that gives people a university level course in humanities. And another project coming out of our Housing Support Center is our choir, the Shining Lights Choir. The Shining Lights Choir is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year. It has 4 CDs, many performances on radio and TV, and in live settings, of course. And it just gives people a voice in community. A few years ago, the choir was awarded a Human Rights Award for bringing awareness of poverty issues to the broader community. And this is Wayne McNaughton, as I mentioned, who has been very active in a number of anti-poverty organizations. And in this photo, he's receiving an award. He's received several awards. The future, a project we're working on now, we're working with 4 other agencies, the Heritage Trust, Ecology Action Center, and ARC Services for Youth. This is an attempt to extend our model of housing management to young adults. ARC, who works with young people, takes an approach that's very similar to ours, and we work well together. But this house, it's an historic house, moved from one part of Halifax to another. It's featured in one of those big move programs on HGTV. At one of the oldest structures and wooden structures in Halifax. But it's going to be home to 5 young people. Young people in our community are doing this already, going out and renting a house and living together. We are trustee for a few people in that situation, but here they'll be able to do this with the help of a sympathetic landlord and with the help of ARC, who they may already be associated with. And the results, I think the results of operating in this manner are that we're often making good decisions, especially on the tenant selection process. As I said, I'm so proud of the kinds of decisions that our tenant selection groups have been able to make. It helps us to operate on a limited budget too. I mentioned how tenants are such a great support and resource to each other, but they also are easy on the buildings usually. I know that our first building in Dartmouth with 16 men, it was built in 1988 and had carpet throughout the hallways. We have only changed that carpet once. People have such a sense of ownership and take such good care of the building. And we're helping people to make their homes, to achieve such a stability. When people come to us, we ask them what their housing history has been, and usually we find quite a lot of instability. But when people come to our housing, we have very few move-outs. We had 6 move-outs last year. 4 of them were to positive situations, the bigger apartments, moving in a stable relationship with somebody else, and 2 were unfortunate moves where people had to move back to unhealthy housing situations. But that's quite a history of stability for people after a long period of instability. But thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol. I'm now going to change the presenter over to Heather, and we'll get her presentation on the way. Thank you again, and I'm going to put Heather online.
Okay, are we good?
Sorry, yes, you're good. I muted myself. Go ahead. Yeah.
So as Dominica said, my name's Heather Rattanavong, and I'm the Wraparound Service Coordinator at Camponi Housing. And I'm going to speak today about our wraparound services and our tenant engagement programs. Camponi Housing Corporation is a non-profit affordable housing corporation. We've operated in the city of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan since 1980, and we're the largest Aboriginal housing organization in Saskatoon, with over 400 units throughout the city, and we have a mixture of apartments, duplexes, and single dwelling homes. Camponi's mandate is to provide, maintain, and sustain affordable, safe, and respectable housing for families, with particular emphasis and priority upon individuals and families of Aboriginal ancestry. The mission is to foster growth and strength and pride within the Métis community. In particular, provide safe, affordable, and adequate housing for Métis people in Saskatoon, and maintain stable and sustainable organization. But perhaps more importantly, Camponi has a vision of healthy homes supporting strong communities, and we recognize that we can't have healthy homes without healthy people. I'm going to start by speaking a bit about the unique needs of Aboriginal people. When discussing the needs of Aboriginal people in Canada, it's imperative to acknowledge the effects of colonization on both the individuals and the communities. The cultural dislocation, intergenerational harms of historical trauma, and the social suffering inflicted on Aboriginal people through colonization practices in Canada have created a situation which requires a holistic approach to healing and reconciliation. Aboriginal people across Canada share a legacy of colonization which has resulted in social, economic, and political circumstances that bring significant challenges to their health and well-being. And when I speak of Aboriginal people throughout my presentation, I'm including First Nation, Métis, and Inuit. Colonization has impacted Aboriginal people across Canada in many different ways. And although this list is by no means exhaustive, I'd like to discuss these particular impacts in more detail, mostly because these are the effects I see most prominently affect the lives of the people that I serve and work with. The traditional family unit was destroyed through colonization. For over a century, many Aboriginal children had virtually no experience of family and community life due to the residential school system and the 60-70 scoop. Families were deprived of ordinary bonds of love, care, and pride, and the right to parent their own children. And this is reflected in disproportionately high percentages of Aboriginal children in care. 48% of all foster children in Canada are Aboriginal, while only 7% of children are Aboriginal. These numbers are much, much higher in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, where we're at, where 85% or more of the children in care are Aboriginal. Every time a child is apprehended, even if it's only temporarily, the housing stability of the family is threatened due to a loss of benefits, income, and psychological trauma. And I see this regularly with my clients that I serve. Colonization has also resulted in a loss of cultural identity and pride. During colonization, Aboriginal people were taught to be ashamed of their heritage, language, customs, and spiritual traditions. And as a result, there's been a loss of language and ability to communicate with elders. In Saskatchewan, only 20% of off-reserve First Nations people and 9% of Métis can conduct a conversation in their Aboriginal language. This has resulted in a loss of knowledge, traditions, culture, and history being passed orally from one generation to the next. Language encompasses so much more than just words. There's physical, emotional, and mental and spiritual pieces to language. And when there's a loss of language, all of these things are affected. It's well studied and known that physical, mental, and spiritual well-being is directly related to knowledge of one's language, and we see these effects in the people that we serve. Colonization has also resulted in a loss of livelihood and skills. There was a dependency on government systems and a loss of self-determination and hope systematically created through colonization. This has resulted in almost 5 times higher unemployment rates in Saskatchewan for Aboriginal people, as well as 30% lower incomes across Canada and disproportionately higher rates of poverty. And again, this is especially marked here in Saskatchewan and Manitoba, where more than 60% of First Nation children are living in poverty. Even with affordable housing, families are struggling to meet their basic needs and maintain their housing. The trauma suffered through colonization practices has been passed from one generation to another, and I think we've all heard the term intergenerational trauma. The evidence of the impact of intergenerational trauma on the health and well-being and social disparities of Aboriginal people in Canada has been well studied. Intergenerational trauma has resulted in 2 to 6 times higher rates of suicide, mental illness, addictions, violence, and sexual abuse. And I'm not going to go into the details of all these stats, but I put these up because when you look at them, they're alarmingly and disturbingly higher than the general population. And you can see that the colonization practices continue to impact every aspect of our tenants' lives and well-being. And more often than not is the underlying cause of the housing instability of our clients. Aboriginal people traditionally have a very holistic view of mental wellness and emphasize relations and connections to others. Culture and spirituality are frameworks for treatment developed by Aboriginal people, and family and community have a key role in helping individuals regain their sense of balance. Effective treatment involves identifying the strengths of families and communities and developing programs that build on these strengths. Camponi has recently adopted a holistic housing strategy. The holistic housing strategy is intended to usher in practical, positive, impactful, and sustainable change based on a model of empowerment, community involvement, and strategic partnering. This is our holistic strategy summary. Involves revitalization and economic strategies, as well as tenant relation and community development initiatives. And I'll be focusing my talk today on the last 2 strategies listed, which is establishing partnerships and communication strategies and enhancing and improving tenant relations, developing initiatives and partnerships that will create awareness and skills necessary for the successful tenancy. Traditionally, housing providers use accountability through a landlord or tenant community relations officer. So those are your lease violations, warnings, home visits, sometimes eviction in extreme cases, as well as pride in developing a sense of pride through good maintenance and renovations. And traditionally, these are the 2 things kind of used to build successful tenants. However, due to those impacts of colonization that I discussed, Aboriginal people require a holistic approach that includes education, individual and family supports, as well as community engagement in order to be successful in their housing. Camponi Housing has developed and implemented both individual and community programming to achieve more successful tenancies. And this slide is a summary of the services we provide, but I'm going to talk a bit more in detail of these services. The individual and family support initiatives are provided through our wraparound services. This is a program that I work with and I'm currently the coordinator for. Our wraparound services are provided free of charge to tenants identified as needing help in maintaining their housing or improving their quality of life. Tenants do not have to be at risk of eviction, but most tenants who access the services are experiencing some type of housing instability. The services are voluntary. They're person-centered, so no one-size-fits-all approach. The type and the intensity of support is determined by the needs of the tenant, and the services range from everything from general, just helping fill out a form or giving information, to intensive case management services where we're working with them and meeting with them at least once a week. Our wraparound services include assistance with the application process, workshops and rental education, general support services, budgeting support, and intensive case planning. New applicants can get assistance with filling out and understanding application forms and acquiring documentation needed for their application. As well, the wraparound service facilitator can help assess the support needs of applicants before they're placed, as well as assist with coordinating support planning before, during, and after placement with us. We've run a series of skill-based workshops that were funded by the Community Initiatives Fund. These were determined by sending out a survey to tenants and asking them what areas they thought that they would like to learn about or could use more support around. We did workshops on budgeting, cooking, gardening, relationships, senior services, and babysitting and home alone course for our youth. We're currently developing a rental education program, and this is being fully funded by the Connexus Credit Union Community Investment Program. We're developing this so it can be delivered as either a workshop style to a group or one-on-one with a focus on the area of need. So, for example, if someone's having trouble with budgeting, then we could use the material to sit down one-on-one with them and work through that budgeting. Tenants can access what we call our general support services by phoning, coming to the office, or booking a home visit. Most of my work is done in the homes of our tenants. They tend to prefer us to come to them and are quite comfortable with having me in their homes. The tenants can get information and referrals on in-house and outside community services and programs. They can get assistance with understanding and navigating some of the complex systems, help with completing any kind of forms they have. We do a lot of that with our senior tenants who have more difficulty with literacy or understanding the forms. And I do a lot of advocacy with people involved with other systems such as child and family services. Budgeting is a common service utilized by our tenants, and the type of budgeting assistance provided is dependent on the needs of the client. This can include advocacy, accessing available programs, payment plans, and referral to internal or external debt management services. Camponi also has a tenant alternative payment program, or TAP, and that's where tenants can work as an employee of Camponi doing maintenance or cleaning or other jobs to pay off their arrears and gain valuable work experience. Camponi has also partnered with and received funding from Connexus Credit Union to offer 9 different financial workshops in 2018, and those will be targeted at various ages and needs of tenants. We offer intensive support services through our wraparound service program. This program is intended for tenants who need an intensive team-based support in order to succeed in maintaining their housing. So these tenants are typically experiencing multiple complex challenges that are impacting their ability to maintain their housing and are at risk of eviction. It's a person-centered, team-based planning process, and it's driven by the unique needs of the participant and their family. It's based in wraparound values and principles, and I won't go through all of them, but those are them. And it uses a wraparound model of care facilitated by the wraparound service coordinator. So the service coordinator will perform an intake to determine if the client is eligible, willing, and appropriate for the program. They get to know the strengths, culture, and needs of the client and help them to identify their goals and vision. They then identify and connect the client to informal and formal supports needed to meet their goals and coordinate the support team and facilitate planning around that. We always ensure that the planning process is person-centered and that the voice and choice of the client is always respected and central. So it's not about our mandates or what changes we want them to make, but really about their goals and the way in which they want to go making those changes. We adjust that plan as needed and fill in the gaps where the support needs are not met by other agencies or people. So I try and fill in where we're unable to connect them to a service or agency, or they don't have an informal support to play that role, then we'll tend to fill in that as their support worker. The goal is, of course, to transition the client out of the program once they're stable, their supports are in place, and their goals are met. The coordinator is also responsible for reporting the program outcomes to funders and board members, of course, as well. The goal of the intensive program is to aid individuals and families in creating a team of people who can support them in meeting their needs, empower them to accomplish their personal goals, and improve their quality of life while improving their housing stability. The program is intended to be flexible and adaptable to the unique needs of the client, and my role with each of the households I support is very different and often changes as the needs change. We also have a formal partnership with the Saskatoon Indian and Métis Friendship Center in Saskatoon with their Home Fires program, and with this partnership, Camponi will be providing 24 affordable rent apartment suites in a building that was funded through the RDP, as well as an on-site office for case managers and an on-site program space. And Connexus Credit Union is committed to furnishing that space for us once it's renovated. The Home Fires program at the Friendship Center will provide tenants who are participating in their Home Fires Housing First program, as well as the case managers for their participants. And then Camponi will provide tenants who are participating in the intensive wraparound service program at Camponi, as well as case managers for our program participants. And then we'll have a wraparound service coordinator who kind of coordinates all of those services. So it'll be a mixed group. All of the people living in the apartment building will have a support worker. Some will be supported through the Friendship Center and some through Camponi, but they'll all have a support worker and be working towards their own personal goals of stability. We also offer cultural and community engagement programs, and these are offered through our tenant engagement services, and they're ran by our tenant engagement coordinator, so not myself, but we do work closely together. The goal of these services is to build a sense of community and belonging, promote community healing in a manner that is respectful to the Aboriginal culture, and to create a sense of personal responsibility and accountability through healing, cultural identity, and community connections. The tenant engagement programs have been funded through the Community Initiatives Fund this year. We have partnered with a community school in the core of Saskatoon called Princess Alexandra Community School. And in partnership with them, we're offering children's culture camps, family fun nights, sewing and quilling workshops, senior social groups, and a community garden. Camponi recognizes the importance of elders, and we attempt to include elders in all our community programming. Elders are the holders of Aboriginal wisdom, knowledge, and history. They share the traditional cultural values and lessons by using orality and role modeling traditional practices. Elders traditionally hold crucial roles in supporting both formal and informal education of First Nations communities, and they enhance the self-esteem and pride of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people. At Camponi, elders sit on the board of directors and help determine the strategic direction of the company. They participate actively in our tenant selection process. They perform traditional prayers and blessing at events and provide guidance and support to both staff and tenants. We've held 3 culture camps, which have been really well supported by several different funders. We already have partial funding in place for another 2018 summer camp through the Connexus Community Investment Program. The goal of our culture camps is to facilitate opportunities for elders to share traditional knowledge with our tenants and children, instill a sense of pride and knowledge in Aboriginal culture and tradition, promote community healing in a manner that is respectful of Aboriginal cultures, and to plant the seeds to grow the next generation of traditional healers and teachers. We are currently running a ribbon skirt workshop in partnership with Princess Alexandra. Princess Alexandra also holds a weekly drop-in ribbon skirt sewing group that our tenants participate in as well. And we've held a quilling workshop that was also successful. The intention of this is to develop skills, build community relations, foster cultural pride and identity, and promote healing by reconnecting our tenants with their Aboriginal culture and practices. We hold regular family fun nights. We were holding them weekly, and we're now doing a monthly fun night. It's held in partnership again with Princess Alexandra Community School. And we offer food, games, crafts, and cultural activities to strengthen family, cultural, and community bonds. And the goal is to create regular opportunities for our families to spend quality time together while building community relationships and a sense of belonging. Many of our senior tenants are underserviced and socially isolated, so we've done a lot of work around creating opportunities for them that are barrier-free. We did a senior service information session, as well as we've partnered with the Saskatoon Coalition on Aging to join their social club, which is run monthly. And as well, we're doing a senior cooking group in partnership with Princess Alexandra Community School. And the goals of these programs is to offer those barrier-free opportunities for our seniors to build social relationships and become more active community members, as well as offer opportunities to promote cultural inclusion, sharing, and community healing. Camponi and Princess Alexandra started a community garden last summer, and we plan to expand these to all of our apartment buildings this next summer. The goal is to empower community members to work towards collective goals, provide a source of food security, and build stronger, more stable communities. We also started a Facebook page to encourage communication and feedback between our tenants and organization, to build a sense of community among our tenants, provide information about our events and announcements, as well as we put up any community resources and events we learn about that may interest them. We've seen many positive impacts. This is a really new initiative for Camponi. Like I said, or they said in the intro, we just started this in February of this year. And since starting, approximately 70 households have already accessed some type of support through our wraparound services. 5 of the households are currently receiving intensive case management services through our wraparound service program. So we're getting regular weekly home visits and planning with a team approach based on their needs. None of the households receiving or accessing services have been evicted, and we've received funding from Connexus community initiatives to hire additional wraparound service facilitator and to expand a lot of our support services. The tenant engagement services continue to build community partnerships and expand their community programming with financial support of community initiatives, as well as Connexus community investments. Camponi has witnessed the positive impacts of the holistic housing strategy on the housing stability and the quality of life of our tenants. And we're really inspired to continue to find new and innovative ways to empower our tenants towards positive change. That's everything.
Thank you very much, Heather. All right, so I'm going to just change the presenter back to me. Perfect. So hello, everyone. Thank you for listening to those presentations. They were excellent. We would like to now open the floor to any comments or questions. You can go ahead and type them in the question box on the control panel if you have any questions. I do have one here from one of the attendees, and this one is for you, Heather. That's why I've not put you on mute yet. So. Okay. The question is around the case management. So the person is asking, do you have any specific criteria that would put someone under general case management versus intensive case management, or is that on a case-by-case basis?
That's a good question. So when we first developed it, we kind of envisioned that we would use, I don't know if people listening are very familiar with the SPDAT tools, but they are commonly used here in Saskatoon to assess need for services. However, it's really been more of an evolution towards, so most of the people come to me starting out with just accessing a general service like helping with a form or something like that. And as I get to know them and their needs, it becomes more apparent that they have these complex needs, then they kind of transition into the more intensive case management. So it's really about what are the needs of the person, and do they need that more intensive service in order to be successful? Most of all of my clients receiving intensive case management are scoring medium to high acuity on those SPDAT assessments. So they have multiple overlapping needs. It might be, so you might have legal as well as child welfare as well as mental health and financial things all going on at once. And they really need that intensive support in order to be successful. So, sorry, that was a vague answer, but I guess the bottom line is we look at the risk and how complex their needs are and determine if really that intensive team approach is needed in order for them to be successful. That makes sense? Sorry, does that make sense?
Oh, sorry. I had myself on mute now. So I was saying, yes, it did make sense. Thank you so much. And I'm going to move on just because we have a few more questions actually coming forward now. And I'm going to switch gears and ask a question of Carol. So I'm going to put Carol off mute and I'm going to put you on mute just for a second. So hi, Carol.
Hi.
The question is, how do you determine which applicants are brought to the tenant selection meeting for the residents to choose from?
We bring any applicants except the odd one that we are very sure will just not work. And there aren't very many of those.
Okay, so you'd bring everyone who applied would be attending, or would be at this tenant selection meeting.
Oh no, they don't come to the meeting. We bring a short bio. We interview the applicants ourselves, and with them come up with a short bio that we would take to the tenant selection committee.
Sorry, that's what I meant. I meant applications. Sorry. Okay, thank you so much. The next question is, I might have, okay, let me just read the next question. So this question is for Heather. Heather, what is the staff complement like for the two tenant support programs, the wraparound services and tenant engagement? What are the staff backgrounds or education who are working in these programs is the specific question.
Okay, so our tenant engagement coordinator who's doing the community development program, she has an Indigenous social work degree, or had. She just left us, so we're gonna have to fill her spot. But she did have a Indigenous social work degree, and had worked a lot in community public speaking, community development initiatives on before coming to us. So was very involved in traditional cultural practices and healing, and was quite knowledgeable in that. So, and she was just a one-man show, but we partner with other organizations such as Princess Alexandra, the Coalition on Aging, the Friendship Center, other places to offer our programming and help in that way. So yeah, and then for the wraparound services program, again, it's myself doing all of those services. We just acquired funding to hire another facilitator to take over those intensive case management clients. And we're currently in the process of hiring for that. And we've requested a social work degree or equivalent human service degree with experience for that position as well. And then my education and background was in the bio. I'm not sure I need to repeat that.
Nope. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we are bare bones for staff.
Yeah, and you said, I mean, the one program just started in February, right? So it's
yeah, we're really hoping that with the announcement coming tomorrow,
yes,
that we'll see more funding coming towards these support services, because right now everything's internally funded, other than the contract position that we've gotten through Connexus Community Investments. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to ask the next question, but I just want to know, there was someone who asked a question about the tenant alternative payment plan.
Yeah.
I, by accident, deleted that question. So whoever asked it, could they type it back in, and I will definitely pass that on to Heather. But this question is, the next question is for the both of you. I'll let Heather answer first since I have her off mute right now. And the question is, how many support workers do you have that work directly with tenants versus the number of units that you have or you're supporting?
So I'm supporting 5 households in those intensive support services right now myself.
Okay.
And then since February, like I said, we had about 70 people access services. So that would be like, might be anything from help with a form to a referral to information in those kind of general services. So yeah, was that the question? How many people access and how many staff? I wouldn't go. Yeah, so I'm not accepting any more intensive. I'm unable to right now. We have a wait on accepting more intensive until we hire. Because I'm definitely at my max with what I can support successfully. So, and if someone was working full-time and only doing intensive, here in the city, our intensive case managers, I think, typically have 8 to 10 clients that they're supporting in that intensive way. So it is very intensive. It's actually very low staff to client ratios. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Carol, same question to you. So how many support workers do you have working directly with tenants versus the number of units that you have?
I just wanted to mention, I just there was just a new tweet that Wayne, who I mentioned, has done so much community activist work, just received last night the Senate of Canada 150 medal. So
wow.
Another award for Wayne.
Congratulations,
but, yeah. We have 81 tenants, and I was saying we are very under-resourced, I think. Some of our tenants don't require a lot of support now after they've become more stable. But I do frontline work myself as well as other management work. We have a program manager whose primary work is with the trustee program, but she does frontline work with our tenants. And then we have our coordinator who operates the Housing Support Center. She also does frontline work with tenants. And the 3 of us are on call, we share the on-call. We have another person who's the office manager and accountant, and she does frontline work with tenants. So there's nobody who does strictly that kind of support, but it's shared amongst the four of us.
Okay, thank you, Carol. So back to Heather. I have two more questions here. Unless there are any more, we have time for a couple more. So Heather, this is the question that I accidentally erased earlier. Sorry about that. So the question is, for the tenant alternative payment plan, what types of work do the tenants do? And are all tenants eligible, or how do you decide which tenants are allowed to participate?
Okay, so the type of work is dependent on what's needed. So in the summer, it might be cutting grass of vacant lots, whereas in the winter, it may be snow removal, could be painting, cleaning, helping out maintenance staff if there's things that they could use an extra hand with, like a fence or something where they mostly just need someone to hold. In terms of eligibility, we use it for people who are in arrears, so they would have some sort of rental arrears with us. They are an official employee, so they are hired by Camponi, and it's mostly about whether they're capable. So we need them to be, able-bodied. We need them to be able to have a phone that we can contact them at if work comes available. We need them to be able to get to the work site on their own. So those criteria oftentimes means that people aren't able to do the tenant alternative payment plan because maybe they're off because of disabilities, or they don't have a vehicle or a phone due to income as well. Yeah, so that's really the only criteria, is that they're able and that they have arrears, and then whatever they work goes towards their arrears. They're limited in how much they can work as well. Most of our tenants are on social assistance, and once they work over $200, make over $200, it starts to be deducted off of their benefits. So we always kind of warn them of that too.
Okay. So I mean, the follow-up point to that question was also whether the jobs that they're eligible for, do they have to have the skills coming in? Since some tenants may think that they have the skills but they don't actually have the skills for that job.
Yeah, well, most of the jobs don't take a lot of skills, and the ones, if they're out with maintenance, will be supervised and work alongside a maintenance person if it takes a little more skill. And then say it's cleaning or something, they're given kind of a very clear direction on what's expected and how long it should take and that kind of thing. So I think a lot of the jobs are pretty basic, and anything that's a little more complex, so they would have the support of maintenance staff there to guide them.
Okay. So the final question is, I think, a pretty straightforward one to you again, Heather, and it's the question is, does the Friendship Center in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, have the same types of programs?
Oh, I wish I knew. Sorry, I don't know how to answer that. I'm not really familiar with their programs or what they run out of there. I know they do have, I know the city itself has some similar programs, but I don't know that it's run through the Friendship Center.
But the city, you say, like an organization, or the city of Prince Albert has similar programs?
I'm not sure who they're run through. I know they have housing support workers, and they have a hub that works with clients with more complex needs and stuff, but I don't know enough about their programs to speak in detail.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. I'd like to, I think that's all the questions that we have. Nothing has come in for the past couple of minutes, so I'm going to say that those are all the questions. So that's all the time we have then for today's webinar. I'd like to send thanks from CHRA to Carol and Heather for taking the time to speak with us today. I'd like to also thank the audience for participating and for all the great questions. Our next webinar that's scheduled is on December 5th, and it will be Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada will be joining CHRA for a discussion on urban programming for Indigenous peoples. Please visit our website at chra-achru.ca /webinars for more details. And that website and that information is actually going to be included in an email that you'll receive in about an hour. Today's presentation will also be made available on our website in the next few days. So check back soon if you'd like to hear it over again, or if you'd like to share it with your organizations with people who were not able to attend today's presentation. So again, thank you so much, Heather and Carol. And that is all for today. Have a good one, everyone.
Thanks.